John, we gaan starten.
Yes.
Hi everyone, good to see you all here. Last people are finding their spot. You're all very welcome here tonight. Great to see this many people. And you're here in this event, and it's organized as a part of the Sustainability Week. And it's a cooperation between the Green Office and the Studium Generale Groningen. And the goal of Studium Generale Groningen is to sharpen your mind and expand your horizons. And they do that by organizing lots of innovative and multidisciplinary activities, such as lectures, films, debates, and many more. And if you'd like to check out their program for this month, you can go to our website, sggroningen.nl. And you can also subscribe to their newsletter if you want to know more. Tonight, you've all seen what this is about. It's about climate anxiety. And I, like probably many of you, grew up knowing and learning about climate change. And knowing that life on Earth will drastically change during my lifetime in a negative way has really impacted the way that I live my life and also my thoughts and expectations of the future. And even though I really try to live my life in a sustainable way, it sometimes feels like whatever I do, it won't make a difference. This impending doom can creep up on me, and it makes feel everything quite futile, you know. And over the last year, I've seen more and more articles about this idea of climate anxiety. And once I read it, I knew that's what I have. And there was that many people around me have as well. And looking into the audience tonight, I can see I'm not the only one. So it's good that you're all here. Tonight we'll hear a few perspectives from different speakers about why we should, or maybe shouldn't, be anxious about climate change, why climate anxiety should be necessary, what the dangers are, how we even define climate anxiety, and they all have different perspectives. As you can see behind me, we have 3 speakers here tonight, and I'll shortly introduce them to you. And then they all introduce themselves and their expertises and their research to you. And after that, there will be space for questions. Questions from the speakers to each other, but also questions from the audience. So feel free to participate. Our first speaker of tonight will be Ernst-Jan Kuiper, the one over there. He's an environmental researcher, but also an activist. He works for Milieudefensie. Right now you're working on an appeal against Shell, I've heard. And you're also a spokesperson for Extinction Rebellion in the Netherlands, and I'm sure every one of you knows that name. The next speaker of tonight will be Peter de Jonge. He's a professor of developmental psychology. He's one of the top researchers in the interface of psychology and psychiatry. And the main topics of his research are about depression and anxiety in a lifespan perspective. And over the last few years, you focused on climate anxiety. The last speaker of tonight will be Valentina Lozano Nasi. She just completed her doctoral studies in environmental psychology. And you specialize in psychology of climate adaptation. Yeah, and you've introduced a new term that you will talk more about tonight. It's called transilience. And it's a perceived capacity to persist, adapt, and positively transform in the face of adversity. In this case, climate adversity. So please put your hands together for his first speaker tonight, Ernst-Jan.
Is it work?
No.
Yeah? Okay, cool. Thanks. I still have to introduce myself, or?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, everything you said is true, actually. My name is Ernst-Jan Kuiper. I studied in Utrecht. I did my master in climate physics. And afterwards, I studied the Greenland ice sheet for about 5 years, seeing how it's melting. And since about a year or 2, I've been working on the court case against Shell, the formerly Dutch oil giant. Yeah, so I guess that should be enough, for now at least. So climate anxiety is something I'm quite familiar with, to be honest. It's something I've been struggling with for at least a decade. And I want to spend my talk explaining how I deal, or at least how I think I deal with climate anxiety and what is the best remedy. But first I want to start off with a I think, a 2-minute summary of the latest IPCC report, just so that we're all on the same page in terms of like where we are. Please put on your seatbelts. Humanity can still emit about 300 gigatons of CO2 before we hit 1.5 degrees of global warming. This is known as the carbon budget. And with current emissions above 40 gigatons per year, we have about 6, 7, 8 years left before we hit 1.5 degrees. And if we continue burning fossil fuels, we'll pass 1.5 degrees. If we want to stay below 1.5 degrees, which we all agreed we would in the Paris Climate Agreement, and climate scientists are urging us to do, global CO2 emissions need to go down by over 10% per year. That is something that has never been achieved in peacetime. And at least to my knowledge, no politician or government is actually planning on doing something in that order. So global emissions should be in a free fall by about 10% a year, but instead they continue to go up by about 1, maybe 2% a year. And current global climate policies are in line with about 2.5 degrees of warming at the end of this century, which I think we can summarize as just catastrophic. Because above 1.5 degrees of warming, we will likely lose the tropical coral reefs. We will lose most of the Arctic sea ice, part of the permafrost, which in itself will release more greenhouse gases. And also importantly, above 1.5 degrees, it becomes harder for both humans and ecosystems to adapt to climate change. And in most cases, it's not possible above 1.5 degrees. Furthermore, above 1.5 degrees, and this was the topic of my research, we will likely lose the Greenland and West Antarctic ice sheet in the long term. We have passed the tipping point by then. Which means that in the long term, and I emphasize in the long term, we will be looking at 5 to 10 meters of sea level rise, which will basically cause every city in the world, every coastal city at least, I mean, to be flooded. Or as my former colleague Peter Kuiper says, it's not a question if the Netherlands will flood, but when. On top of that is the recognition by the IPCC that the climate models so far have had the average global warming more or less right, but the impact is way worse than they thought. So climate change has surprised us in the past, and it will likely do that in the future as well. Or to quote the latest IPCC report, the choices and actions implemented in this decade will have impacts for now and thousands of years to come. I think many people, even today, consciously or unconsciously decide to ignore these facts or sometimes even deny them. Or they believe the comforting, what I would be calling lies from politicians that we have everything under control. Or that climate change will be a future problem and it will not affect us. Or maybe sometimes they even believe that future technology will somehow solve this and will do geoengineering and that kind of stuff. Or they have simply other urgent matters on their mind, like making ends meet, for example. However, there's a growing group of people, and I think many of you are among that group, that cannot ignore these kinds of facts any longer. And I think once you've come to terms with these facts, it's actually quite hard to think about anything else, or at least that was the case for me. Especially when you realize that climate change is, on human timescales, irreversible. For me, basically every other societal issue pales in comparison. And since I've been studying climate change for over a decade, ignoring these facts was kind of hard because they were in my face basically each and every day. So I had to get to terms with all these shocking facts, and therefore I've been experiencing climate anxiety for quite some time now. And I think the first message I want to get across to you is that in my experience, in my opinion, climate anxiety is a very normal emotion in a very abnormal situation. Now I want to tell about how I deal with climate anxiety. And of course, I've known about climate change for a long time. I kind of knew it was a problem. I watched, just like most people my age, I guess, the documentary of Al Gore in 2006, An Inconvenient Truth. And I remember I was quite shocked. And I realized, you know, this is kind of a big deal. This is a big problem. But I think I was 18. And I forgot about it a few weeks later. I went on with my life like most people did. And I forgot about the whole thing. I think nobody's really seemed to care, so why should I? And that was until 2011, because that's when I started with my master in climate physics at Utrecht University. And I started this master for the simple reason that I think the climate system is awesomely interesting. Not because I wanted to, you know, learn about this big societal problem or, you know, learn all these facts. However, during this master, I realized that this problem, this climate change, is actually way more severe than I thought. And back then, 2011, 12, 13, the scientific facts were definitely alarming, not as alarming as they are today, but it was pretty clear that if we left this thing unchecked, it would become a big problem. And importantly, contrary to most other political and societal issues, that climate change is irreversible on human timescales. So during my master and PhD, I started to do what most people do. I tried to reduce my own carbon footprint. So I started to recycle more. I became a vegetarian. I started to fly less, and now I don't fly anymore, etc., etc. But it didn't take really long before I realized that, you know, this is just a drop in the ocean, and it's not going to make a big difference. So I decided to join fossil-free Utrecht University, and we tried to make our university switch to a sustainable bank. We tried to convince our university to cut their ties with fossil fuel giants like Shell and ExxonMobil. And we tried to convince our pension fund, ABP, to sell their shares in fossil fuel companies. And we spent actually quite some time doing this. But to be completely honest with you, we were not very successful. And for me, this went on for a couple of years, 2013, 14, 15, 16, 17, etc. For my work as a PhD student, I was reading alarming papers on a daily basis. Politicians were either in complete denial or doing next to nothing or pretending to do something. Public awareness was still quite minimal, I think, even among my friends and family. And that, at least back then, that type of activism that I was doing wasn't achieving very much. So for me, my climate anxiety, it peaked in 2018. And that is because in 2019, in the beginning of that year, I finished my PhD. I decided to take some time off, be unemployed for a while. Who cares? And coincidentally, Extinction Rebellion was founded more or less at the same time. And since I had so much anxiety and frustration build up over the years, I mean, I attended a meeting quite soon, attended an action training, and within a few days, I joined my first action and got arrested for the first time. At the same time, I began to give quite a lot of talks about climate change and civil disobedience, which inspired at least some people to become a climate activist as well. And becoming a climate activist, for me, both in the form of civil disobedience and giving talks about climate change, turned out to be the best remedy I have for climate anxiety. Because climate activism, it's definitely not the magic pill that takes all my climate anxiety away. I still experience climate anxiety regularly, especially since I became a father 5 weeks ago. But I am, however, way better able to deal with the frustration, anger, but also the sadness that I feel. To be honest, I'm not really sure why civil disobedience helps. It could be because ignoring police warnings and breaking the law gives you some kind of adrenaline rush, which it does. It could be that being surrounded by other activists who also suffer from the exact same thing is comforting. Or it could be that climate activism, including civil disobedience, is actually finally beginning to become mainstream and broadly accepted, and we're finally starting to achieve something. To be honest, I'm not really sure why it helps, but I do know that for me it helps a lot to be active, especially in civil disobedience. Maybe one of you can explain why it helps. I'm not really sure, but for me, it's the only thing that keeps me going when it comes down to this topic. So my advice to everyone who is experiencing climate anxiety is basically to take action. Thank you.
Okay, I was wondering, are there people here who experience climate anxiety at this moment? I wanted to ask that, but okay, yeah, I was a bit afraid of that. Are there people who do not experience climate anxiety? That's probably a better question. 1, 2, 3. Okay, well, that's a minority. My name is Peter de Jonge. I have studied mental disorders for the past decade or two, and I was always intrigued by the question, what does a mental disorder consist of? When is something a mental disorder? When should it be treated? And then 1 or 2 years ago, I stumbled across the concept of climate anxiety. And I thought, well, let's see if I can apply what I have learned in the past 20 years to climate anxiety. And then the first thing that came to my mind was that we want as a society that as little people have mental disorders as possible, right? We don't want a lot of people to have depression. We don't want people to have drug abuse problems. We don't want everyone to be psychotic on the street. We want things to go down. In the case of climate anxiety, this is interesting. I would like that more people have climate anxiety. So I hope the last 3 people will also experience climate anxiety after this evening. That makes it a bit different than most mental disorders already. But let's look at the kind of formal criteria of mental disorders. First of all, a mental disorder, most of the cases, is disproportional. That means some people are very much afraid of spiders. Okay, fine. But to an extent that they don't dare to go to their kitchen or their bathroom. Well, then it becomes a bit weird. Some people are afraid of open spaces. Well, okay, fine. But if it means that you don't dare to go on the street and go to this meeting, for instance, then you're disabled, then you cannot do the things that you want to do. People can be afraid of many things, but if it's proportional, I mean, it's fine if you swim in the North Sea and you're afraid of shark. Fine, no problem. I'm afraid of that too. That's kind of realistic. So how is it about climate anxiety? Well, you have to be a climate expert. I think Ernst-Jan showed that there is something going on. So maybe it's proportionate to the thing that is going on. Let me see. Let me have to check my storyline. So what are people afraid of when they have climate anxiety? Lena Hulsle, who is sitting there talking to her neighbor, has had several interviews with people who experienced climate anxiety. And what she finds is very interesting because people find it different, first of all, to differentiate between emotions. So some people are more eco-depressed when they tend to look back and see that nature is already not as nice as it used to be, that they are missing insects, they're missing birds, more like a kind of nostalgia feeling. Some people immediately go into a kind of blaming status, that they say, well, it's this older generation, the baby boomers, they destroyed everything for us. That's more eco-anger, right? And then there are people who experience real climate anxiety, and then you see basically two types. Some people look to the future and they get a kind of panic feeling, like this is so uncontrollable, we cannot do anything about it anymore, we're too late, these processes have already started. And some people, and I think most people, will have a bit of a less extreme form of eco-anxiety, namely that they worry about the future, that they worry about their children, their grandchildren, on life on Earth, but not like tomorrow it's going to happen, but more in a broad sense. In psychiatry, there is a disorder that is called generalized anxiety disorder, which comes pretty close to this kind of feeling, that people are worried about something in the future. They have the feeling that something is going wrong, but they cannot exactly pinpoint what it is exactly. And it is a bit different because people who have eco-anxiety worries, well, there it becomes a bit more specific. They are afraid of that their village will be flooded, that there will be more earthquakes, that animals will die. So it is also a bit different than generalized anxiety disorder. However, the most important aspect is the question whether or not it's proportionate. So if it's something that is in line with the reality, and I think to that question you could easily say, well, if you are anxious about the climate, there's nothing wrong with your sense of judgment, right? The other aspect about mental disorder, what makes something a mental disorder, is whether or not you suffer from it. Well, people with eco-anxiety, they suffer from it, right? You suffered from it, you still do, I do. It is not a nice feeling to be afraid of something. But the interesting thing is that these negative emotions, they're not here by coincidence. Everyone has negative emotions, and as we know, negative emotions are there to warn us for certain things, right? They warn us for dangers, for threats to ourselves, to our people that we love. And in this case, it's not different. These negative emotions, they inform us that something is going wrong. So I would be tempted to say the reverse, that if you are not threatened by all the things that are going on at this moment, it looks like you are the one who is having a problem. Pathological denial could be a new DSM disorder, because something is going on. And all climate researchers are so much in agreement. In psychology, we are never as much in agreement as climate researchers are with respect to the question if something is going on at the moment. Then I want to reflect on one point that you also addressed. If you have climate anxiety, should it be treated? And if so, how should it be treated? How should you deal with it? And immediately it came to my mind that if you imagine a woman who is going to the doctor because she is depressed, And the doctor asked, well, why are you depressed? Well, that's because my husband beats me and I don't dare to end this relationship. Okay, so what does that mean? That means that the symptom that the woman has is not the thing that you want to treat. It's a symptom that something is going wrong in her life. And maybe she should get rid of this husband who is beating her. The same with us. If you have this negative feeling of the climate, do something about the climate. And try, first of all, to do your own thing to help to minimize the effects of what we're doing. And the second thing, well, what I do when I feel bad, I go and have a walk in the forest, and it strikes me that there is still a lot to enjoy from nature. There are still trees and beautiful things that we can enjoy from, and that gives me some peace of mind. And finally, when you experience climate anxiety, it also means that you are thinking about something. You're thinking about something very important, and you should continue to do that, even if it's painful. Those feelings are painful. They're there to warn you, to warn you from things, and you should basically embrace them and try to try to live with them and not to get rid of them. That's my view on it.
Okay, now it's my turn. My name is Valentina Lozano Nasi. It's great to see so much interest for this topic. As you said, I just finished my PhD in environmental psychology. My thesis got approved about a month ago, so literally. And I want to provide you with what I think can be a complementary perspective to what we have heard so far. But before, I would like to tell you something about myself. So I am half Colombian, half Italian. And during my high school years, I was living in Italy. And in Italy, in order to graduate from high school, you need to write, they call it a small dissertation, on a certain topic, and you need to discuss it with a committee in an oral examination. Well, long story short, I ended up writing my high school small dissertation on how, for many of the characters that we had studied during the last year of high school, the moments of crisis were fundamental for their evolution and growth. I had no idea at the time that I would end up applying this very same idea to a much thicker dissertation, namely my PhD dissertation. But before I go into the details, I would also like to share with you how everything started. Because now that I can look back at my whole PhD journey, I can see that there were three key elements that shaped and guided the start of my PhD. The first one was the definition of climate change adaptation. I did my PhD on the psychology of climate change adaptation, so I looked at the definition. And according to the IPCC, adapting to climate change means minimizing or reducing harm, or finding new opportunities. And this second part of the definition really got my attention from the start, because I hadn't seen much research talking about this. The second aspect came from readings that I did outside of the realm of psychology. I was reading papers from spatial sciences, from geography, from sociological systems. And there has been some criticism against the idea that adapting to adversity means bouncing back, which means maintaining or recovering what we have. This is at the core of the notion of resilience, which is a very popular term in the adaptation literature, also to climate change. And some scholars have proposed that this might be a limited perspective when we look at adaptation to certain adversities, like climate change. And there were some papers that very interestingly proposed and demonstrated how a complex system adapts to adversity, not when it preserves itself in spite of the adversity, but when it changes because of the adversity. And I thought that was fascinating. The third element were some historical and anthropological analyses that were published a few years ago in the very prestigious journal Nature. And it's a very big group of scholars, and they analyzed human responses to past examples of climate change. And what they showed is that, first, it is not the case that past societies were systematically destroyed by past confrontation with climate change. But also, they did not merely survive. They were able to adapt flexibly and to even thrive in the face of past climate change. So for instance, during the so-called Little Ice Age or Little Antique Ice Age, humans developed new agriculture techniques and new water management technologies that allowed them to keep expanding their economy. They also developed new trading methods, they found new sources of energy, and they even developed new cultures and languages by migrating to different areas. I want to specify that contemporary climate change is unprecedented in many ways. And yet, I think it is true that it is changing us. We are looking for better alternatives. We are getting creative. We're looking for solutions. So these three key elements kind of converged into what became the core research question of my PhD. Since climate change cannot be avoided, I wanted to understand whether people perceive they can adapt to climate change. But especially, I wanted to understand whether people perceive they can do more than bounce back to what we had. So I introduced a new construct that I called transilience. And transilience reflects the perceived capacity to persist, adapt flexibly, and positively transform in the face of an adversity. In this case, climate change. And I studied it mostly in the context of climate change. So as a first step, I wanted to be able to measure transilience. So I developed a scale. In psychology, a scale is basically a set of questions that allows me to give people a certain score that indicates the level of their transilience. I then included this transilience scale in questionnaires that I used to conduct a series of studies. And the findings were very interesting. First, I found that people on average do perceive they can persist, adapt flexibly, and positively transform in the face of contemporary climate change. And I found this across different countries. I focused on Western countries, but still across different regions that face different concrete examples of climate-related risks. Second, I found that when people show high levels of transilience, it is not the case that they are less worried about climate change, or that they perceive less the risks posed by climate change. Actually, in some studies, I find quite the opposite, that the higher their transilience, the more they worry about climate change, and the more they think it poses a risk, which to me was key, because I didn't want to tap into any form of denial with transilience. The third finding was that high levels of transilience make people more likely to take concrete action to adapt to climate change. And in this category, I included all kinds of examples of behaviors that people can engage in order to protect themselves, their households, and their communities from the risks of climate change. But I also included some so-called transformative behaviors. So for instance, whether people would be willing to radically change the way they live because of the confrontation with climate change. And the findings were consistent. The last relevant finding is that higher levels of transilience are associated with better mental health. So to summarize, people do perceive they can do more than bounce back in the face of climate change. And they perceive they can even change for the better by adapting to it. When they do so, it doesn't mean that they minimize the problem posed by climate change. Quite the opposite sometimes. When people strongly perceive resilience, they are more likely to take concrete action, and they are also more likely to feel better overall. I don't know if you know this, but the word crisis originates from ancient Greek words that can mean decision and turning point. The contemporary environmental crisis that we're facing is very serious. The science is clear. And we need to take urgent action. It is also very important that we find ways to minimize the negative consequences that this crisis has on us, including mental health problems. At the same time, I would like to remind that this can also represent a decisive moment for us, a turning point that can give us the opportunity, and I think is giving us the opportunity, to reassess the way we do things and our practices, to challenge the status quo, and to evolve as individuals and as communities into a better society. Thank you for listening.
Thank you all so much, guys. I think we've learned a lot, we've heard a lot, and we've learned a lot. Are there any pressing questions you have for each other after hearing each other's talks? Or is it enough to just think about it? Well, I might have a question for you guys. Something I was wondering is I really want to stay up to date about what is happening in the research of climate change and how people respond to it, but it also can feel very overwhelming and sometimes too much to comprehend. Do you have any tips on how to find a balance between taking in enough information and staying up to date and not being paralyzed by too much climate anxiety? Because, Peter, you said climate anxiety is actually a good thing, but I can still imagine a way in which it might be too much and it actually might make you do less or make you less active. So do you guys have any ideas on how to mitigate that?
Yeah, you two are looking at me. Well, the thing is, I don't know because for my job, I have to read all the climate reports,
Right.
And energy transition reports. So, yeah, I don't know. What I have begun to realize doing this job that I have now for about a year and a half, where I also study the energy transition, not just the problem, but also the part of the solution at least, is there are quite a lot of possibilities, and the IPCC is quite clear. We can still limit global warming to what we hope and think are some kind of acceptable levels where we can adapt to or not, but that's your topic. The frustrating thing is we just don't do it. We are collectively organized in a way that the people at the top make the decision not to do it. That's more or less the summary, I guess. But now I'm drifting away from your original question.
Yeah. How do we find a balance between staying up to date and wanting to be active, feeling like we have some agency in the matter? Yeah,
I don't think I'm the right person to answer that because I just read everything. So maybe one of...
Yeah. If I can help you a bit. I have the feeling, well, we have access to so much information that's really unprecedented, right? Yeah. You just have to press a button on your telephone and you get all kinds of information also about things that are completely irrelevant to your life. And yet we are addicted to that information. And I have the feeling that also with respect to climate, we consume too much information. I mean, it's good to know the general picture, but it's not necessarily good to be confronted with all aspects of climate anxiety while not being able to do something about it. That brings you as an organism in a kind of constant arousal, which will not help, and which has a risk of paralyzing you, I think.
Right. Valentina, you said that there are historical moments in time in which humanity also faced a crisis, and that there were ways which humanity transformed at that moment in a positive way. But of course, I didn't study what you studied, but when I was thinking about historical crises, I was like, yeah, but at the same time, it usually meant huge loss of human life, and maybe not for the better for those people. Is that comparable to what we're facing now? I feel like if we find a way, like in the Netherlands, we'll probably find a way to survive climate change, but there will be huge areas of the world in which people are not able to do so. Is the concept of transilience also applicable to those people who have less opportunity to, well, transform in a positive way?
Yeah, thank you for your question. I think there is so much in what you asked.
Oh, sorry.
So no. It was a good thing, because I think it also shows that it's very complex. Like what we are facing is very, very complex, and as such, there cannot be like one simple solution or like a magic wand that we can find and fix everything. And I myself don't know, like I don't have all the answers. To answer like the last point that you focused on, I didn't study, I wasn't able also because of COVID to study transilience in contexts where people are severely affected by climate change. As I said, I focused on Western countries, and that's one of the limitations that I also mentioned in my thesis, because in these areas, indeed, it's very important to understand whether this construct can also be relevant. And in terms of my expectation, I'm a bit conflicted, because on the one side, there is literature showing that, for instance, indigenous communities are finding much better ways to adapt than Western countries, because they are much more in touch with nature and they have been confronted with changes in nature. So it might be that the fact that they have more experience with the adversity also makes them more resourceful. But this is indeed something that needs to be studied. So I put it in the foreground. But I think it's important to highlight that I am not saying that, this is just going to be all good, all fine, and no life losses. But I think there's nothing like that in humanity. Like, unfortunately, it's impossible to think of something that is just going to make it all good, and especially that is going to make it all good right away. That's my opinion.
Thank you. I would like now to open up to the questions from the audience. And Annelies has a microphone, which she will bring to you if you have a question. So you can raise your hand, she'll walk to you, and please stand up if you can and are able to. And just speak loudly and clearly so everyone can hear you. Sir, over there.
Okay, thank you. My name is Michiel Bergen. I'm a lecturer in energy and environmental sciences. My anxiety started when I was a student, and I did like Ernst-Jan a course in mid-80s about energy and environmental sciences, and basically everything that is now on the agenda was already there on the agenda. So that all inspired me also to continue, let's say, in energy and environmental sciences. But I'm also a bit more optimistic nowadays than I used to be.
Really?
Yes, because, and Jan already told us, we are now heading for, let's say, 2.5 degrees with current policies implemented.
Yeah.
Well, compared to, let's say, 15 years ago, that is almost half of the climate change that was predicted then.
Yeah.
So from that perspective, I'm actually rather positive. I see a lot of changes. I was there in 2006 for the Al Gore movies. I was in big theaters where the movies were shown, and then I was asked to comment on that. Nobody actually, as you told already, was really inclined to take any action at that moment. There was a lot of blames. Yes, those Chinese people, they built all these coal-fired power plants every 3 weeks, etc.
Right.
So I think a lot has changed. Now 75% of the adult population in the Netherlands thinks that is a big problem. I think most of the people are inclined to take some action. So in that case, I'm actually rather optimistic. But I also see that still an awful lot has to be done.
Yeah.
And 2.5 degrees is not enough. And also I think we still have the challenge to, let's say, also look into the developing world.
Yeah.
And my question, one thing was I would put a little bit other perspective.
Right,
my question
right,
is, I see students quite a lot,
Yeah.
and they have, let's say, climate anxiety. What are the do's and don'ts? What I can, let's say, advise those students?
So as a teacher, what do's and don'ts?
Yes, I ask them about them and what do they do, and well, they come also, they show their anxiety.
Right.
From a more or less the psychological point of view, what are the do's and don'ts?
Do's and don'ts. I'm looking at the psychologist between you guys. But you might also have valuable perspectives. Thank you for your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, the light of our microphone is turned off.
Yeah, the do's and don'ts. Well, if someone would come to me saying that he or she has climate anxiety, I would first want to hear exactly what the content of this feeling is, right? Well, in the last days when I was preparing for this lecture, I more and more had the impression that people who have climate anxiety are sensitive people. They sense that something is going wrong, and we should be appreciative of that. If no one would have climate anxiety, nothing would change. So I would give compliments to such a person. So, well, I can understand that it can be a painful experience, but it is good that you observe the world and your surrounding. And I think in most cases you'll find ways to make make such a person a bit more relaxed about the feeling. But at least the most easy thing you can do is to help a person accept those feelings.
Any don'ts? Anything you shouldn't do?
Well, in general, don't think for other people. Don't say, well, you're right or you're wrong, or that's the fault of this and that's the fault of that. Stay close to the feelings, I would say.
Does anyone else want to respond, or should I continue to the next question?
Well, something that popped in my head is that it is also important, I think, because there is research showing that when people there's this idea that anxiety motivates action, but the findings, for instance, in terms of threat messages using experimental designs are not that consistent. And there is a very nice paper, I now don't remember the author, but he wrote actually kind of a criticism to the IPCC reports, saying that they should not just say how threatening the situation is, but also what we can do about it. Because if you want to motivate action, it's much more effective if you give people both a picture of what's happening, there's something wrong for sure, but also what can I do about it? Because if you only give them the threat, it's much easier that they get paralyzed because they don't know what to do about it. So then, yeah, maybe they also prefer not to think about it, not to, and then, yeah, they might get into this more negative spiral. So I think knowing, and unfortunately with the clickbait culture, we don't get like the headings that are clicked the most or the most catastrophic. And I think there should be more balance into informing people what they can do even if it's just a small action, but I think then that will add up and that will give people a sense that they can do something about this.
Right. So in one way, validating their feelings, saying that you are right to feel anxious, but also giving them ways to act, to do something about it. I saw a hand in the back. You're already there.
Hello, I'm Marius. I have a bit of a two-layered question that goes back to the moderator's first question on the resources and the amount of it. The first part being, I think most of us are part of the scientific community, and we're very much in a bubble because of that. And how much of this information is actually accessible to people outside of our bubble? And then the second part of the question, what are actually good publicly accessible and free resources, for example, for news on climate exchange or anxiety to find? Yes.
So how accessible is climate information, and what are some useful sources?
Yes.
And even if I can add on to that question, how do we make such complex material accessible? How can people outside of our bubble understand what we're talking about? I don't know if you guys have any ideas. Maybe someone in the audience has ideas, because I think a lot of people out here have something to say.
Hello, I'm Valentina Lozano. I used to be a teacher in biology, and I recognize the story I had. I started my study in the 70s.
Right.
And so I was conscious about the situation, and I never thought I would make my language. I was not taught to teach in English, so
I can help.
I could see climate change. I never believed it would come in my age. And
Right.
I think it's very interesting, but I feel very powerless, and that's my anxiety is the feeling of powerless. And you just told small things about it, and I'm very glad for your answer. It helped me very much. But now about the bubble,
Yeah.
I'm very glad to react on it, because I decided not to earn much money, because when I have a lot of money, I will buy stuff. So
That's a good tip.
it was someone in the 80s, I think I heard a man say that, and I thought it's a good thing. So I have not a lot of stuff. I have an old car on benzine, and I think it's very sustainable, because it's not. I still use something what is good. I live in a neighborhood with a lot of people who have not a lot of money, because I have not a lot of money. And there are a lot of people who recycle. They don't have the need for all the things that you need. You are a lot of brains, and you have to use your brains. But the people in my neighborhood, they have the same feeling as everyone, most apart from 3 people here, and they recycle, and they collect stuff that's laying on the ground. And I think they are very important in the whole of this, because they practice every day. They feel as powerless as all of us, but that is what they can do.
So even though they're not in our bubble and know every report that's ever out there, they still act.
They still act and
Right.
have the same anxiety, and they experience the things on their way. And it's not the bubble where you're in, but what is the problem, and how do you deal it on your own way?
Thank you. I see a hand in front.
Hi, my name is Renske de Jong, and I'm with Science Links, the science center of the Faculty of Science and Engineering. And what we do is we try to inspire, especially young people, to think about what kind of future they want to live in. And I think you don't need all the information that's available to think about the desired future. And maybe that's what we need much more, to spark imagination and to spark this transilience. So, of course, we need some information, but there's already a lot out there, also outside of the academic bubble. And my question is, how can we much more think about the desired future? So then there's a call to action, like, okay, that's where we want to go.
Thank you. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I think I do. It's quite hard to get out of my bubble, our bubble, I guess. And that's why I give talks to basically every audience that wants to hear me speak. But I think I became to realize that only since a few years or so, there is actually also quite a positive message from the science community. And that is that a sustainable world is not just a cheaper world, it's a much better world. And that's this sounds, really hopeful and activistic, but it's actually true. We just have to get out there and explain to people outside of our bubble that ditching fossil fuels will improve their lives. It will prevent their children from getting asthma. It will prevent, or at least limit, things like sea level rise. It will lower their energy bills, and it will make us less affected by things that are going on the other side of the world, like Putin invading Ukraine and our gas bills going through the roof. Right. That is almost inconceivable in a sustainable energy system. How we get that message out there is quite hard, because there's also a lot of misinformation, as we all know. But I think the science only has shown this since a year or two or three, maybe. This is quite recent, that we know that a sustainable energy system is viable. Yeah. It's cheaper and it's more efficient. Right. We just have to get the message out there.
So you could combine the negative climate message with a positive one. There are better possibilities than what we're doing now. That's even more attractive.
Yeah,
than
exactly.
Staying at what we're doing right now.
Because the first reaction you get is, what does it cost me? Right. How much do I have to pay to get an electric car or to get solar panels? We just have to explain to them that is an investment that will earn itself back within 5 or 10 years.
Right. Thank you. Are there any more questions? A lot in the back. All right. First you, and then we go all the way to the back.
Okay, hello.
Hi.
Thank you for your talk. I have a question actually about the last thing that you said about energy transition and how a sustainable world is better. But actually, a lot of the emissions of the world don't come from fossil fuels. I am from Brazil, and there the emissions are from the expanding crops in the Amazon. So it goes much deeper than just ditching fossil fuels. We need to change our patterns in consumerism. How do we get that message through? I mean, it's such a radical change. How can we do something about it and get that message instead of only just, let's do solar panels,
If only we had all the answers here. I don't think anyone here has a solid, probably a solid answer, but not an all-compassing answer. But it's a very valid question, I think.
Yes, I think, again, it shows how complex this is. And in terms of how to get the message out there and to make it more approachable, I think that's a very relevant point that I think also as scientists we need to focus more on. But in this regard, related specifically to your question, what I wanted to say is that I came across, I think it was 3 days ago, a documentary that just came out. Is called The Need to Grow. And they also have a whole website on, and the documentary is very interesting because it connects, they basically say that if we ruin our soil, So if we don't focus on really just the basic, how do we grow food, then everything else like is kind of based on that, because that's also our source of energy. So if we cannot eat, you know, and they show this very interesting way of thinking also about like closed loops where everything kind of renews itself, and like I don't want to spoiler too much, but it's very, very interesting. And I think, for instance, I got the advertisement for this documentary because I clicked, like I like things that talk about solutions, so you can also kind of exploit the algorithm of social media, and then these things keep popping up, and then I saw this thing about this documentary and I was like, oh nice, and then there you can see, yeah, you can get more acquainted with this kind of information, but in terms of how to make it more available, I'm not sure, but I think something is happening.
And I also...
Again, the name of the documentary.
Yeah.
The need to grow.
The need to grow.
Yeah.
I think it's also about, well, it raised a concern to you, the way we use our soil, but it also presented a viable alternative to the way we do it now. Yeah.
They show basically how we can regenerate the soil that it has been exploited by industrial agriculture, and yeah, I'm not going to say more than that, because otherwise I tell you the documentary.
So when talking about these big problems, I think that's a recurring theme here. People have to be aware of the necessity to change and the problem at hand, but it kind of falls flat if we don't, well, reach them alternatives, viable alternatives and ways to deal. Are there any psychological tricks we can maybe use to, well, informing people to kind of pull them to our side to see the positives, or maybe like the, well, a way to cope with it?
Tricks, I don't know, but I was just thinking, this afternoon I had a talk with Lena again.
Hi, Lena.
Hi, Lena. And it was, well, this symposium is all about climate anxiety, but maybe we should study climate denial. So how is it possible that, I mean, most of you have probably read the news about the different scenarios for the Netherlands and for the climate in the next several years. How does it work for people who read such a message and still say, well, yeah, but I'm not going to change? That is interesting. Why are people doing that? And well, people may have good reasons why they do that, but we don't fully understand it. And I think scientists should be more. For instance, it could well be that you read that and you do feel the stress, but you block it away from your consciousness immediately. But your body reacts to that with cortisol and stress hormones and these kind of things. But you block it away from your consciousness because it hurts.
Right.
That's what we do all the time. If you read a negative story about something, whether people are being tortured or killed, we block that from our consciousness all the time. And how do we do that? And why do we do that? What are the reasons why we do that? And we should have a look, because I think there is enough information about the climate. I mean, you have to be really living in a cage.
So you've never
in
heard
a cave,
of it.
sorry. If you don't think that something is going wrong.
Right. So by studying why people kind of block the whole message, we can hopefully reach more people and activate more people to act.
Yeah.
All right. I saw a few hands in the back. I'd like to hear those.
Like this? Okay. So thank you so much for your talk. Is it okay? Okay.
Yeah.
I found all of your speeches very fascinating, but the following questions I would like to focus more on the clinical practice, since this is related to what we are studying at the moment and also discussing at our program right now. So I've seen a lot of hands being raised of people who experience climate anxiety right now, and I would like to ask the second speaker, how frequently do actually patients come to you with this health request?
How often do people actually come to you with a request, treat my climate anxiety? Is that right?
Well, not. I'm not working in practice at this moment. So basically, my colleagues or my friends or my neighbors or something like that, and I talk to them. So that's different. But I think it is very important to really find out what people experience exactly. So we have another expert here in the audience on emotion differentiation, and people are not very well able to differentiate between emotions. So they just feel bad, or they feel, some men, for instance, if they feel bad, they just become angry. And some women, well, no, let's not make these
You're generalizing.
Ooh, just in time.
Right, sorry.
But
Just
still, you can do that with men, right? So some people are just not very good in differentiating emotions. And if they are frightened of something, they may become angry, or they become sad, or whatever. But first, talk to a person to see what is really the point. Is the person really afraid that something will go wrong in this world? Well, the comforting thing about it is that it will not happen tomorrow, but it will happen in a couple of years. So we still do have some time. If a person is blaming other people, well, this picture is much more nuanced, and it's probably not going to work only to blame others for the problems in this world. So first, it starts with making clear what the experience is really like.
All right. I thought I see still a hand. Yeah? Do you have more questions?
Yeah, so I have 2 questions.
No, go ahead.
So I wanted to ask what actually the literature shows at the moment. What are the successful strategies that have been applied so far, like in the clinical research, in which we can help the patients and also clients combat the climate anxiety?
So are there any strategies to treat climate anxieties in clinical trials?
Yeah, exactly.
Do you know?
Lena?
Your helpline. Do you know?
I know that actually like a lot of... one moment.
Oh, you get a microphone if you're all right with that.
So I'm also not aware of any literature on that specifically, but what I hear a lot of recommendations on also from practitioners is to sort of acknowledge these emotions, and but also...
Can you keep the microphone a little closer, almost touching your chin?
Okay.
Yeah, it feels uncomfortable, but it works.
Yeah. But what seems to help to, like, what I also heard from people who talk to me about it is to just give them a platform to talk about it, because it's not something that's very common to talk about. So already, like, opening up a discussion about it and then, like, really joining groups and doing something about it, that seems to be more the key rather than, like, the classical therapeutical approach.
Right. I think also to add on that, when we talked in preparation of this evening, I asked you if climate anxiety is actually a diagnosable condition, and you said right now it's not. And in your talk, you also kind of hinted that you might not want to treat eco-anxiety, that you shouldn't medicate or treat the anxiety only if it blocks you from doing anything. Mostly it's very useful.
Yeah, so I can imagine that in extreme circumstances, someone is completely paralyzed and only stays in bed because of this constant fear. Well, that's definitely a sign that something should happen. Or or a person who is obsessively collecting information about climate and doing nothing else. Then it really becomes problematic, and you should help a person.
And you should treat them.
Yeah.
All right.
But I think what also helps is discussions like these. The feeling that if you have climate anxiety, that you're not the only one who has it, but that you can talk to other people about it. Like, I feel so bad about how things are going. Do you have the same feeling? And that is one of the key things that humans also have. They help each other.
Right.
And that works.
Right. Thank you. Lots of hands. It's hard to pick, guys. There's still a really persistent one all the way in the back who has reached out their hand. I think they're on the last row. All right. Yeah. Oh, he's already standing up. So yeah, you.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Jen. I'm from the Philippines. I actually want to understand, like, how can we approach climate anxiety in a third world setting where, like, resources are scarce. Like, for example, like climate anxiety in the global south. It's quite a different context out there. In the Philippines, for example, we face 20 plus typhoons each year. And when people are stuck, like, in a constant cycle of destruction and rebuilding, and like they're at the forefront of facing all of those, like the wrath of climate change. So like, how do we like approach climate anxiety in that kind of setting? Like, I think in that kind of setting, we can just like tell people to like get green jobs or go volunteer or manage your emotions. So like, how do we kind of like navigate that kind of context in climate anxiety?
Yeah, that's a valid question. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point, that we also put our climate anxiety in a context, that we can be afraid that your grandchildren will not have the same life as we have because of climate change. But some people actually experience very acute and very extreme consequences of climate change already. And in that sense, it's also a bit weird to talk about these general worries while other people are struggling for their life. They don't have the time to worry about climate change. There is not a one-size-fits-all approach. I mean, we should do something about the climate on a global scale. That's clear.
Any of you? Any ideas? No. I think it's a very valid question you ask, because I was also kind of struggling with the question you just asked, that it also feels like this event, for example, is kind of a first world problem in a way, that we're feeling very sad and bad for something that we probably won't experience, not as bad as a lot of other people in the world. I think that's another reason to not only feel, but also to act. Maybe in civil disobedience, maybe you'll have a lot of new people joining you. I hope so. Question on that side of the... Or do you want to say something?
Yeah, I would... Yeah, first of all, I completely agree with you. It's to be honest, I don't know, because the faith of the people in countries like the Philippines is not in their hands. That's the realization that is quite daunting, I think. It is, however, I mean, it's one of the reasons I'm doing actually civil disobedience, because I'm a white male in a privileged country, in a privileged position. I have, and therefore I think that I have a responsibility to actually use that privilege to not just fight for, my kids and grandkids, but also fight for these people. Yeah. Because what we are doing here is affecting them more than what they are doing over there is affecting them. So that's why, I eventually decided to do civil disobedience, definitely.
Thank you.
Yeah, hello. My name is Steven van der Poel. I'm a historian working for the university as well. I have a question for Valentina. Perhaps you're familiar with the article Jonathan Franzen once wrote with the title, "What if we stopped pretending?" So what if we just conclude that we will not make this change? In theory, we might, but in practice, we won't. And somehow this gives a kind of feeling of rest as well. So, because he concludes that even if we consider that, well, there is no hope in a way, we still can continue doing the best things we can. And maybe is that a kind of transilience as well? So accept that the situation is in a way hopeless, but on the other hand say, well, but just we have to continue doing the right things because that gives us more time for the future as well.
All right, thank you.
Thank you for your question. I think it's a very good point. Very interesting. I would say that when I think about transilience, it's not about the future being hopeless. It's not about being necessarily hopeful. I think we just don't know for sure, like 100% sure. If we think about, for instance, when COVID hit, we couldn't expect that would happen at that scale. So I think having a certain degree of maybe it's not gonna, like having no fixation on the certainty of we know for sure what's gonna happen, I think would be the best to also think in terms of, well, we don't know, but we can still do our best. And in my opinion, hope that that's going to contribute to at least not get to the worst case scenario. To me, thinking about, oh, let's stop pretending. I'm not familiar with that article, by the way, so thanks for that. Let's stop pretending we're not going to make it, but still, let's just do our best. I'm not sure because I think we're not going to make it, it's pointless anyway. It's also what makes people not act very often. So, yeah, I think the unknown about the future might be best, but I'm not sure, 100%. But thank you for that point.
So a very enthusiastic hand over there, and then we'll go all the way to the back. You'll keep walking tonight.
Hi, well, my name is Luisa. I'm also from Colombia, so my question is building on Valentina's last point, but also related to the point that was raised about the global south countries. So we're talking about how anxiety can lead to change, but this is more on an individual base. So what you can do yourself to improve the situation, but I think that is neglecting the reality that is not the individual changes that we can do at home that will have the biggest impact on the current situation. So for me, it comes as a question related to, first of all, how can we help people from lower classes that do not have access, for instance, to all of the sustainable options, or for instance, myself, when people say, well, I don't fly anymore. Well, if I don't fly anymore, that means I don't get to see my family ever again. So how can we give a relief to the people that are not in a privileged situation, that do not have access to this type of solutions? And also to still validate the fact that it is not an individual change, and still encourage them to do the base level changes.
Right.
I can say something, try. It's a very, very complicated question, like related to the individual versus collective level. Actually, in my thesis, I also studied transilience at the collective level. And indeed, the argument for that is that climate change doesn't affect individuals in isolation, and we need to act collectively to address it, but we're also affected collectively. So I think indeed the collective dimension is very important. I don't think I would dare to say that maybe the question is not what has the biggest impact, because that might also lead to a certain paralysis, because I think I'm doing the right thing, but then, oh, maybe that's not enough. But it's like, does it matter if I do it? And I think even if it's individual actions, they can still matter, and everything can add up. With respect to how to make the global south more, like how to help these people who, as you correctly say, don't have access to the resources, on top of my head, I don't really have an answer, because I think that also taps into inequality and into many other societal issues that Yeah, I don't know, but I think it is important to at least raise the point because I think it's very valid. It is true that the Western countries are most responsible for the emissions that cause these consequences in the global south, so I think it's still, maybe the anxiety and the experience with the adversity is not comparable, but the responsibility in contributing, like we can do a lot. But yeah, how to help those countries, I don't know, but I think it is important to keep asking that question.
All right, thank you. I think we have time for one more question, maybe two. You saw one over here. Yeah, exactly. That's the one I was thinking about.
Hello, my name is
Hi.
Monique. I'm a physiotherapy student doing my minor in global health at the moment. My question is a bit more personal. How can you maintain motivation? And do you have any recommendations on the psychological side to maintain motivation to be transilient? In all of these negative perspectives about, oh, there's so much uncertainty, we don't know if what we're doing will pay off in the end. I'd just like to know what you'd like to say on that.
Do you guys have any personal tips that maybe help you?
Well, I think it is not realistic to think that we can be motivated all the time to do anything. I think, indeed, the fact that we don't immediately get, let's say, a reward for doing what we do complicates things because the effects of our actions are going to be delayed in time. But I think finding this intrinsic motivation and this knowing that this is the right thing to do to at least contribute to the solution side of the, like, addressing this crisis can be a source of motivation. I also personally try to limit my exposure to the catastrophic news on a daily basis. I want to be aware of what's going on in the world, but I don't want to be exposed constantly to very negative messages that I can't do little about at the moment and that only make me feel horrible right from the start of my day. So having some sort of control in that sense, but yeah, that's what works for me. But yeah, I think knowing that, and also being aware of the fact that there are other people acting, and also getting engaged with other people acting. So there is, now there are a lot of community initiatives that are starting to be set to adapt to climate change, to mitigate, to share energy communities. So be aware of this, and then you can join forces, and then the fact of acting together as a we can also help maintain the motivation. It's the same as when you want to go to the gym and you need a buddy. I think that kind of is the same principle.
Thank you. All right, our final question, this lady.
Thanks. Hi, my name is Corinne. I'm a PhD coordinator at FSE, and I have been trained as a biologist, so I have a more biological question. And I think it's mostly directed at Valentina as well, and sort of complementary to what the other speaker was saying. So even if it's interesting to hear, of course, that humanity has been able to adapt through history, etc., etc. Now I've completely lost my question. Sorry. Yeah. So I think you're saying that people can act when they are more transilient, but at the same time, if people have the notion, so it's playing devil's advocate a little bit here. If people have the notion that there is the possibility to adapt, will that not make them sit back and relax and maybe not act and sort of accept the situation as it is, or think, yeah, we will be able to adapt in future? And secondly, and that's maybe more a remark than a question, is that I think you are speaking very much from a human-centered perspective. And we are talking mostly about behavioral adaptation and not so much biological adaptation, which is a luxury that most of the creatures on this earth do not have.
Yeah.
So, for instance, a lot of animals or plant species are limited by set boundaries. For instance, photosynthesis will stop above a certain temperature range, and therefore oxygen production will stop. So there will not be something to adapt to in future, maybe, for us. So that's my question.
Thank you for your question. I think with respect to if we think we can adapt, then we're not going to act. I see where your reasoning is coming from. However, what the evidence said is the opposite. So, well, first, that we need to adapt is based on the fact that we cannot fully avoid the consequences of climate change. So we have to deal with the consequences of climate change. And as I said, what I found in my studies that have also big samples, like I have samples of 800 people in some of my studies, is that when people perceive transilience, for instance, they worry even more about climate change, and they're even more anxious about worried. That's what I measured about differentiation here. So based on the data that I have, but of course we need more to keep studying these things, I would say that that's not what seems to be the case. And in terms of biological adaptation, I think that's also a very good point. I have no expertise or background in biology whatsoever. I can only say that I think animals are already, and species are already adapting surprisingly much better than us to changing environmental conditions, but that shouldn't become indeed the excuse of like, oh, they'll be fine, no need to do anything. But I don't know if many people would think like that. I'm not going to say that no one is going to think like that, but yeah. And I think indeed like the protection of the biodiversity in our current species is still one of the strongest arguments for why we need to address the environmental crisis. So indeed, in this debate, we focus on the behavior because you also have two psychologists. But I think what I see around also in documentaries, like it's very much about the loss of biodiversity and what we are actually doing to creatures that cannot do anything and haven't done anything, and we are putting them in very difficult conditions. So yeah, that would be my answer.
All right. Thank you all so much. We're reaching the end of the evening. I want to thank all our speakers on giving us very different perspectives on the issue of climate anxiety. I really appreciate all the input from the audience tonight. There were a lot of experts by expertise, but also maybe just through life. I really want to thank you all for sharing your experience and asking these questions. And I really hope you can take something from this night home, and maybe it won't stop you from experiencing climate anxiety. Peter says it shouldn't. You should keep having some climate anxiety. But I really hope you can find a community, maybe here tonight or different places, and you can find a way to act and lower that anxiety and, well, challenge that power to something positive. Thank you all so much.